And good evening again. It's time for Headliners, tomorrow's papers tonight. Before I introduce tonight's guests, let's have a stroll through tomorrow's headlines. The Daily Mail leads with COVID chaos fear as million isolate, and a piece by Andrew Pearce saying if Sir Tony Blair had a shred of dignity, he'd turn the honour down. He would turn down the honour. I should get that in the right order. Does he have a shred of dignity? We will be discussing that lately. The Telegraph goes with, we can't jab the whole planet every 6 months. A sudden expression of frustration and mild fury. And to The Guardian, which reports on critical incidents at several NHS trusts as COVID staff shortages hit. Also, Epstein paid Duke's accuser $500,000. National Trust boss says I had death threats in woke row. The Financial Times has gone with a story we will be looking at shortly, that Apple has become the first company to rack up market valuation of $3 trillion. That's added something in the realm of a third to its value over the course of the pandemic. They also have economy recovery faced with burden of political disarray and Brexit friction. The Metro leads with it's eating or heating, a slightly easier conundrum and proposition to understand than the Financial Times, and Duke's final throw of the dice. The Independent has revealed deal Andrew hopes will stop legal case, and PM sticks to Plan B COVID restrictions. The Eye goes with NHS leaders warn PM over growing COVID staffing crisis. They like lots of letters on that page. And on to the Express. Boris, we're on right path to beat virus. The Times also has, we're on the right path to tackle virus. That's a fairly mild deviation from the other. And the Mirror leads with secret deal to silence Andrew accuser. Prince claims £370,000 gag signed by Virginia Juif. I've never been entirely confident with that. I tell you what, though, I wouldn't mind writing a £370,000 gag. He hopes that will save him from the civil trial. And finally, the star who has ever lightened the mood with cannibals in space. The rush to inhabit Mars has been knocked off course after a space boffin warned astronauts would turn cannibal if it all went wrong on the well-named Red Planet. So, good evening once again. We have tonight's guest now. We have the urbane, dilettante and shed-based voiceover artist, I learned this evening, Steve N. Allen. Good evening to you, Steve, and our free-floating discontent, Nick Dixon. This discontent is no dishonourable title to be bearing within the GBNews context.
Urbane one, but I got...
Do you want to be urbane? You're going to have to wear a tie, Nick, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. I don't make the rules. How are you getting on with your shed? I was very pleased to hear that. Yeah.
Carpeted, insulated.
Was it a pre-existing shed, or have you built this from scratch?
The shed was there, admittedly.
But previously smelt of fertiliser and...
Previous owners had a bar in it. You know, some people turn... It's one of the worst feelings in my life, having to remove a bar from a place.
Tear down a bar and install a workspace. That doesn't sound very urbane, does it, Nick?
No, I'm still just in a little one-bedroom flat, and the exact way you would picture me.
Yeah. We've got a shed, but it's been rotted from the inside out, and I think has proved a home to foxes and other vermin. I think it would need some quite substantial renovations.
It should be a whole show, Shed Chat.
Yeah, we should. The news from the shed. So, our headline stories. The front page of the Mail is, once again, COVID-based. They've gone with COVID chaos fear as million isolate. And this is, of course, something people are beginning to worry about, that there is a degree of self-isolation going on, which might lead to as much chaos, especially with the schools reopening, as if there were to be a proper lockdown. But there is better news inside. The UK's COVID infections have increased by nearly half, 45%, and Boris Johnson suggested that NHS staff could be moved to plug shortages. That's pretty brutal, isn't it? I'm going to move you to plug a shortage. I think you should be allowed a little bit more dignity than that. But the other side of it is that despite a huge number of 157,000 cases today, that's a rise from 109,000, last Monday, the number of people dying with the virus has actually gone down very substantially, 70% decreased. Only 42 deaths reported in the UK compared to 143 this time last week. Now, I don't want to minimise the pain of any one of those deaths individually, but seen as a statistic, that's a very encouraging sign, and to be honest, probably wouldn't even have alerted anyone to the presence of a pandemic on a previous year. Meanwhile, the number of people being admitted to hospital in London has also fallen, with 314 patients admitted on January the 1st. That's a decrease from 437. So, just to be clear, I'm not saying, say, it was never anything to worry about. Obviously, I understand that this is in no small part, I'm sure, thanks to the largely self-imposed restrictions people adopted over Christmas. And if my experience was anything to go by, anyone who was planning to visit a vulnerable person, an elderly relative, or even just a poorly dog, or even, frankly, someone who just didn't want their freedom to travel overseas compromised by an unwelcome PCR test, cancelled long-anticipated and fully catered social events. Not sure, I'm just saying it happened, and indeed many professional engagements with extreme prejudice. And those of us whose elderly relatives were so thoroughly hermetically sealed in their own homes that they couldn't be persuaded to offer hospitality anyway, found themselves caught in the middle somewhat. Worst of both worlds, no social contact at either end of the scale. But there it is, so be it. That was their choice. It's over now, and no one has any need or justification for visiting their grandparents for another 11 months. With this, good news on the hospital front. Perhaps this is light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to come to you, Steve. What do you think? Can we have some measured optimism at this point?
Let me ruin some of that optimism by saying we could be seeing a whiff of the Monday effect, because it's also a bank holiday Monday effect. Stats are often less reliable on a Monday. Plus, this is because the people aren't there to report the figures, because they're all at home self-isolating. So that's one of the ways you can get the figures down. Right. If no one can do any tests because they're all staying at home in their
Yes. We have plenty of tests in our kitchen, though. There's a test in every room. There's one if you go to the loo. You don't need to scroll your phone or read the back of the Domestos bottle. There's a test you can do while you're sitting in there.
But that won't include the death figures, sure.
No, exactly.
Self-test, but you can't test yourself.
That's what I mean. The death figures shouldn't have the Monday effect, though, should they?
No, I imagine they should.
Yeah. Oh, they would?
They tend to die in hospitals, and the people who... This is what normally you see those stats slightly lower on a Monday.
But they are comparing Monday with Monday there. Most of those were Monday-to-Monday comparisons,
This is a particularly stark Monday.
Stark Monday. That was the unpopular Bangles B-side, wasn't it? Just another particularly stark Monday. What do you think, Nick? You feeling optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, I saw a stat yesterday on Twitter that said England had the lowest 7-day COVID rate in the UK, which I thought was interesting, despite being the only one that hasn't, brought in additional restrictions, almost as if banning running in the park in Wales doesn't work. You know what I mean? So I thought that was positive. My negative spin on it is I believe Omicron will continue to be mild, despite what Steve's saying. But it's a bit troubling to me that it took a sort of a mild variant and a backbench rebellion and some investigative journalism from The Spectator just to keep us at this Plan B level, and the government still reserves the right to do a lockdown at any time. Sorry to sort of...
No, I think the thing is, I think it's probably on brand with this channel, generally speaking, to acknowledge that Boris Johnson has been rather disappointing to people who saw him as a fairly libertarian, or at least not a panicker. For all his other undoubted faults, his various lies and misrepresentations and so on in his former career, he didn't seem like somebody who would retreat to the deepest trench in a given moment.
In a fridge. That's the sign of a man who panics.
Did hide in a fridge. Do you think that was a sign that we could?
Yeah, I've never panicked enough to hide in a fridge.
Might have been a foreshadowing of Pfizer.
Yeah, but him and Indiana Jones in the worst one of the films are the only two people I know who've hid in fridge.
Blasted through the air in a fridge, and it actually saves him. And I think that probably actually sent out a very dangerous signal to a lot of young people who tend to hide in fridges for kicks. And we spent thousands, didn't we, on public messaging in the 70s to persuade children not to hide in fridges, and then Indiana Jones undoes all of that in a single... It was a very, very alarming... Do you remember that moment?
That's a little bit... Before,
it was at the beginning of the third film, I think.
I remember that, but I don't remember this thing in the
fourth.
70s. It's a bit before my time.
Oh, you remember that? Don't hide in fridges because the door shuts. Mainly in the 70s, most recreational activities took place either on building sites or refuse dumps.
It's a different
and kids, exactly. There were no screens, and so you had to try and make your own entertainment. And most of that was in abandoned white goods. And if you could get into a fridge and shut the door, you were king of the castle for a little while. But then, of course, the fridge could turn over, and you were trapped in it. Or some fancier fridges actually had a sort of marginal locking device which could confuse a small child.
I learned so much on this show.
Yeah. I'm amazed that we've managed to get this far into the series without that being dredged out of my memory. We may be getting towards the bottom of the pit now. Next story, and this is something else that a few papers have covered, more as their sort of banner headline rather than as their main front page headline. MP set to debate Tony Blair's knighthood. According to one or two, I'm not sure who we're going to give this one to, who we're going to credit with, but there are apparently more than 380,000 signatures on a petition to strip him of the honour before he's even received it. I don't know if he'd be stripped of it, would he? They would just cancel the ceremony, I think, rather than actually give it to him and then immediately whip it off again. That would seem unnecessarily cruel. Anyway, fury grows apparently from families of Iraqi war dead. Well, you can understand that, certainly. If you read a little further into it, the debate looks less likely, as the petition is in fact from Change UK, which is a website which does this sort of thing. It's not affiliated to Parliament. They have their own petition system, and it seems that one hasn't reached a number of signatures which forces them into anything. But Tony Blair, I have to say, is pretty extraordinary. I would like a brief discussion on this. He is clearly held in very high regard by people who book current affairs shows to give a sort of elevated statesman-like view. He remains, to be fair, the only Labour leader to have won an election since Harold Wilson, and the only one ever to win 3 in a row, which is pretty extraordinary. And like Margaret Thatcher, he has an ism, and he still has plenty of ites. And he is also one of the most detested prime ministers since Neville Chamberlain, who at least had the good sense not to outlive his own term by more than a few months. He is blamed by left and right for reneging on his promise that things could only get better by instead taking the country into what many regard as an illegal war alongside Satan in blue jeans, George W. Bush, although it remains unclear whether he is more despised for the 179 British lives lost in that conflagration or the hundreds of thousands of foreign lives which were lost and ruined and the destabilisation of the entire region. Others regard his completely unprovoked assault on the value of a university degree and his soft shoe shuffle version of the long march through the institutions as at least as pernicious, a move that allowed 1,000 NGOs to bloom, all stuffed with well-intentioned pinko scum. But does this mean he was not great? I would have to acknowledge that he was a substantial Prime Minister. Should he be a unique one among Prime Ministers of such stature to remain unhonoured? Nick, what do you think?
Well, I understand your point. Obviously, it would be perhaps odd not to. And I understand that he was obviously good at winning elections. If you watch that recent Blair Brown documentary, you got a real, on a lesser channel than GB, you got a real sense of these were people, Campbell, Blair, Brown, Mandelson, who were just dedicated to winning and they were highly competent. If you compare that with the modern Labour Party, it's a very stark contrast. However, the damning side, which I will now deliver, is...
Contra Blair.
Yeah, the Iraq War was... So I marched against the Iraq War, and I very rarely march, very rarely leave the house, as you know. But me and many...
You must have been about 12.
No, I was old enough to march.
Right.
I like your confidence that I'm younger, which is good for my reputation. But yeah, I did march in London. It was a massive, massive march. And at the time, I remember an interview with Paxman, a slightly sneering interview where someone was saying to him, you know, the numbers are bigger than the police were claiming. He was like, are you saying the police have lied? But there were huge numbers at the time. My point about that is the way the government completely ignored that did cause a new level of disaffection amongst young people. Call us naive, but the way that 1 million people marching in London was completely ignored.
I think that's interesting. Steve, were you on the march? I mean, this is your side, isn't it? No?
Yeah, no, I didn't go on the march. I was against the concept of the wall, but, you know, marching felt like it would have been...
Marching against concepts, a bit woolly, you felt,
Just the concept of marching. But he's also ruined the centre ground. I think that's the terrible legacy.
He has, hasn't he? It is now a disgrace to be a centrist dad, isn't it? It's something that's... it's a slur. It's almost as bad as turf. And I've never really understood that, because it's obvious that even if they might possibly be misguided, centrists... I mean, they're not, you know, they're not a virulent kind of stain on humanity, are they?
If you speak to civil service type people, they'll say, we would love Blair now because he's competent.
Yeah.
They cite his competence. Although getting into the Iraq war with dodgy intelligence wasn't that competent, was it? One could argue.
No. Do you think, though, that... I mean, I just want to do this because it is my pet project, but being determined that 50% of young people should go to university, I don't think he's taken nearly enough stick for that. It was absolutely disastrous.
Terrible idea.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ruins both sides of things.
Yes.
It stops you going to do something that you probably could get a good career in, and also if you go and get a degree in one of the sciences, one might certainly remember, it devalues the concept of getting a degree.
I mean, employers have found ways of working around it, but all it means is that 40% of kids who wouldn't previously have gone to university are now 50 grand in debt before they start to earn a living. I think
unemployment stats.
But even for that, I think we would have to say 3 terms as Prime Minister did define a generation, gave a lovely speech after the death of Diana. I mean, these things mount up. He's probably worth...
But he also wants to bring in... Remember, he's been obsessed with ID cards, which have now reared their ugly head again with vaccine passports. So what about Blair's obsession with that?
Yeah, it's fair enough.
That? I am.
I am as well. I don't like his pronouncements, and I don't like the look he's adopted lately as well, with this kind of long hair and slightly lizardy skin. He seems to be he's like a UK version of the World Economic Forum, isn't he? There's a real kind of Davos sort of vibe around him. Sir Keir, on the other hand, current Labour leader, is so unpopular that Jeremy Corbyn is the preferred choice of Labour leader, according to a poll in The Express. Now, The Express, it wouldn't surprise me, could be trolling. They could be just simply... Who has got this one? Has somebody read up on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's only 8% that Corbyn's got in this survey. That's hard. You know, who knows what the error bar is as well.
Yeah.
I think it's just more telling us that no one's particularly popular. But they've surveyed people in the Midlands, my red wall neck of the woods. I'm from Mansfield. And look, we had a chance to vote for Corbyn if you wanted it back then. And no one wanted it back then.
Don't say no one, though. A lot of people did vote for him. I mean, this is the funny thing with elections, isn't it? They hang in the balance, and then after a couple of years goes by, people forget quite how close it was. Not the last one, of course. The last one, which Johnson came in and just steamrolled with Get Brexit Done. 2019, Theresa May, you know... So 2017, I mean to say, 2017... That was alarmingly close if you were somebody who you considered Corbyn to be a liability, which I hold my hands up. I was among them.
Again, was that Corbyn's work, or was it Theresa May saying, we'll call an election to strengthen my hand, and we thought, no.
Your hand is as strong as you deserve to have. Yeah.
Corbyn was a good speaker, and May was in hiding, was what happened. But yeah, it's interesting. The headline's a bit sort of salacious, obviously. Jeremy Corbyn back to replace Sir Keir Starmer, as if he's just coming in off the bench now. But really, just a little poll that he got 8% of the poll compared to Ed Miliband getting 7%. So it's not a massive story in that sense. But he does still have some popularity. I've suddenly found myself siding with Corbyn he was one of the few to vote against Plan B. You know, there was 8 Labour politicians voted against it, and he did as an independent.
Yeah.
So suddenly I'm a Corbyn fan. Basically, I've gone so far right. I've gone full circle now. I'm a communist. That's what's happened, I think.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's... I'm joking, guys.
The anti-vaxxers, you know, it's a broad church, isn't it? There's probably a few Zionists in there shuffling up next to Jeremy.
I felt Piers Corbyn was joking, by the way, when he said that thing about burning the thing. He delivered it as a joke. It's not my legal position, but...
Piers Corbyn is... I mean, if you think it's like an extraordinary sequence of... Jeremy Corbyn is a liability to the Labour Party, but Piers Corbyn is a liability to Jeremy Corbyn. I remember going into the Fens once to try and find that place where Farmer George... What was his name? Tony Martin had shot some burglars in the back.
Oh, yeah.
And it just fascinated me, that area, because, you know, there's obviously a culture of something more, you know, close to Wyoming or Kansas, where people would self-police and so on. Everywhere you went, they were all like, oh, no, that's the next village down the road. That's not from around here. Do you know what I mean? We're all quite normal and conventional, but they're a bit strange down in the next village. I kind of picture the Corbyn family as being a bit like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's this kind of, Piers must have some. Oh no, I'm not the wacky one. I'm not the conspiracy theorist with the.
So there's a third one now we don't even know about. Exactly. Even more.
Like there's a third Attenborough, isn't there? And was there a third Cray?
There's a third Gallagher. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. There's always one. Isn't there? And welcome back to Headliners. Tonight I am joined by Steve N. Allen and Nick Dixon. You need a middle initial, Nick, I think, if you're going to be urbane.
Nick N. Nixon.
Is it Nick N.
No,
Dixon?
it's not. It's J, but...
J, Nick J. Dixon. That's
not bad, is it?
I've got a
like
J. J's were big in the 60s when I was born. My dad was a John. That was like pretty much the default
solid Christian names.
They've all gone now, absolutely. Where the rot set in. Next up is the Juifre case, as I've decided to pronounce it. Some form of file has been unsealed, I believe, Steve. This sounds a bit like a Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of business.
Probably less fun, but the second reference for some Indiana Jones
Raiders
stuff on the
tonight's
show.
probably, that's just how my brain works, I'm afraid, once it's in.
But yeah, they've unsealed the documents. This is over a decade ago. Gaffrey, I believe.
You'd think somebody would touch up the red eye on that photograph by now, wouldn't you? God.
Well, that's a phrase that I probably wouldn't use in relation to that photo.
Ouchie.
Yeah, back then she made a deal with the then alive Jeffrey Epstein, which covered third parties listed as people that she could end up suing. The Prince's legal team are saying that means she can't bring the case against Andrew, which is an interesting position that I mean, surely you'd want to clear your name rather than, well, you can't sue me because I'm listed under the other people suspected of this.
Yeah.
But he's not actually listed in the document, and she didn't list him. That's a messy one, isn't it? Virginia didn't list Prince Andrew back when this deal was made, before the settlement, the $500,000 settlement was made. So he's not listed in it, so is he protected by it? That will be what the...
I scanned this very quickly, but obviously I never like to become too well informed about these cases, to give you some latitude. But there seemed to be some suggestion that he was within a protected category as a royal, as a member of the royal family, that this was a sort of listed example of the sort of person who might be protected.
Yeah. He lists royalty politicians.
Yeah.
He's certainly high profile, but it still feels like a terrible way of winning a case or not even entering the case.
But anyone who's ever actually worked in the law will tell you that is what 90% of law work is about. I have friends I've studied law and I never pursued it, but I know quite a few people who did and carried on there, and it's extraordinary, especially when you speak to criminal barristers, how many cases are decided on what amount to technicalities, or basically playing your joker at the right moment. That effectively, the system rather than getting to the truth of it and seeing what the law has to say.
And I would have thought a technicality would have been this was a deal that she made with someone who was alive, and I thought your legal status changes when you're dead. I'm now worried about that 2-year contract I've got with that mobile phone provider. I thought if I cark it, the other half doesn't have to keep paying it, but you never know. But yeah.
What do you think, Nick?
Steve's covered the detail of this really well, but the most interesting thing I saw recently was, again, on Twitter, where I get all my information. This Prince Andrew was saying there's no witnesses to corroborate that he was at the Pizza Express. And someone on Twitter had pointed out, he said, if you saw a member of the royal family at Pizza Express, you'd be telling people about it for the rest of your life. I
remember seeing George Michael. Actually, I didn't see him, but it worked out. He was in there with Ridgely. They were still in Wham. This would have been about 1981, and they were in the St Albans Pizza Land. And the rumour went across St Albans it was like the shockwave from a nuclear explosion. It was like instantaneous. There was a large gathering around Pizza Land itself. Rumour had it that the whole back section of the restaurant had been roped off into a VIP area. Because George, I think, was a Watford lad, wasn't he? Oh. And a very down-to-earth fellow by all accounts, and would quite often visit his father's or his uncle's Cypriot restaurant or whatever as well. Anyway, I'm just saying, George Michael,
Right, so that
George
was Michael went nuclear.
So Prince Andrew...
So someone surely would have seen it. So I'm not alleging anything, but it's just an interesting point, isn't it?
It's funny as well, isn't it, that not even anyone who served him, seems to be able to remember. He doesn't seem to be able to remember or find anyone from that. Unless perhaps they have been got at by the FBI.
He is less recognisable than George Michael, to be fair.
We move on to... that is true. He is actually quite easily missed. We move on to a story. I'm just hunting through my pages. I've got it on the FT, which is an unusually sort of financialised and City Square Mile-based story, but it is a real landmark. Apple becomes the first company to rack up a market value of $3 trillion. Now, I remember quite clearly, because I present a show on another radio programme, which is a sort of comedy economics thing. I remember when there were the five big Silicon Valley companies were hovering between $500 billion and $1 trillion, and we were waiting to see which one would get beyond the trillion for the first time. The others obviously being the Facebook, Alphabet, which owns Google and so on, and Microsoft. And... that's 4, isn't it? Apple, who's it? Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and whoever the other one was, anyway.
Lycos?
It wasn't Lycos, no. I really should be able to remember that. That will come back to me shortly. Anyway, now, 3 years later, they're on $3 trillion. It's absolutely extraordinary, and that has been during the pandemic. Now, you could understand... Amazon, of course, that's the other big one, Amazon. And you would immediately understand why they would do so well under a pandemic. because obviously everyone can't shop in the normal manner. But Apple, it's a luxury good. This should be a time where people should be thinking, I haven't quite got the money to upgrade my iPhone this year. Better wait until I'm back off furlough. It seems not. What is going on?
Go on. The only thing that bothers me about this, it's maybe not as sophisticated as your point, but this is like a band getting famous after it's already had its best albums. Because really, Steve Jobs was the creative era of Apple.
Well, I would say Jonathan Ive.
Oh, really? Yeah. Working with Jobs.
Designer, yeah.
But that was the great creative era. Now Tim Cook has just been very good at the stock price and the financial side of it.
They say very, very good at controlling supply lines, at maintaining, functionality at every stage, which is, of course, the boring stuff that actually makes companies work in the long run, isn't it?
But a lot of the share price is also linked to what they'll plan to be doing in the future with AI and who knows what else.
Driverless cars, apparently. I mean, the other big company that's done well recently is Tesla, but they have yet to produce anything in the realm of sales, to support the ambitions, the aspirations that people seem to have for them. I do find this stuff interesting because you just keep thinking sooner or later. I mean, it's not a bubble. I'm not saying they're not worth it. It's not all on bluff. Obviously, they're very good products, but how extraordinarily huge can these things go? Do they just kind of enter a new paradigm and you have to forget about the old one?
Well, possibly, but I don't think it's a good one. I mean, I understand, look, if we're all living under communism, no one would have invented the phone. But you've got to have some companies with a big lump of cash so they can do some R&D. But you get to the stage of 3 trillion, they'd better invent faster than light travel.
Yes.
I mean, that money maybe should be in a couple of other companies as well.
Well, you have to say that there has been an extraordinary amount of sort of tinkering with the cosmetics of communications in the last few years and not so many huge breakthroughs. But we will come to something along those lines a little bit later. In the meantime, a massive rise in the number of young people misusing that technology, possibly some of it Apple, no doubt not exclusively, to visit Incel websites. Nick, for some reason they've asked me to come to you with this one.
Yeah, a little bit insulted. Not an incel, of course. I had a very beautiful girlfriend merely months ago.
You better explain what that means, because some of our viewers probably...
So incel, it means an involuntary celibate, which is a young man usually who struggles to get anywhere with women, and it's not really his choice.
Right.
Contrasted with the MGTOW, which is men going their own way, which is men who have, by choice, simply given up on the whole shebang and said it's too much hassle with divorce laws and custody battles. So this is obviously a very serious story because the story is massive rise of use of incel sites that call for women to be raped, and it's saying that there's lots of violent language on here and there's some actual violent incidents. There have been shootings and things like that.
What, are named individuals calling for people to be raped, or is that a...
This is saying that, well, it cites some examples of people who've said that on the forums. I don't know if they have their actual... some of them are actually
illegal,
named.
Is it not? Would that not be illegal?
Yeah, you think so? You think it would be hate speech? I mean... Well, one of them was this guy, Jake Davison, he's already shot 5 people in Plymouth, that guy.
Right, yeah.
He had said that all women should be raped. So there's a very nasty side to the incel world. So I definitely don't want to be defending violence, obviously. But there is a little bit of an issue where the mainstream media tends to talk about incels as if they're all terrorists.
Yeah.
In the same way, it'd be very inappropriate to do it about any group. The idea that there's lots of incels that are just young men that are struggling, that become nihilistic, that are struggling, and they're on the internet talking to each other. The vast majority of them aren't violent. They're just
a lot of them are like Sid the Sexist from Viz, aren't they? Just a lot of mouth and trousers, basically.
Right. You see the way people like Jordan Peterson have done so well. It's because he's given some guidance to young men. Young men are desperately in need of guidance. Obviously, it's terrible when they go down this path and they start to become violent or rabidly misogynistic, but I don't think they should be necessarily all condemned in the way that the media likes to do.
I've just managed to lower my stool. Sorry, while you were speaking there. Hopefully I can get that sorted out. While we move on, did you have any thoughts on the incel, Steve?
Well, I was going to say, this story shouldn't be about condemning the incels, which is different to condemning the websites. A website shouldn't be hosting content like that.
No.
The DNS provider is this Cloudflare that's had some issues with hosting other websites that people should think they take down. You've got to have a responsibility. I know there's the argument tech company versus publisher, but at some point, if you are in charge of some servers that have this kind of hate on it, you should do something. Might not be shut it down, could be filter it, find a way. I'm in favour of tech solving problems.
Maybe just arrange, for a few blow-up dolls to be delivered to a handful of addresses, and you could possibly just alleviate the whole... I shouldn't be so flippant about it. It is obviously very serious, and it is worrying that this kind of thing should be happening now, because you feel like there is a strange There is a shift, isn't there, in society? I think a lot of us obviously are aware that we live online a lot more. A lot of parents are very anxious about what constant social media use and screen time is doing to their kids. This feels like it's the sharp end of one of those kind of calculations. So these people are, to some extent, perhaps they see themselves at any rate as the victims of an emerging new transactional relationship between men and women.
Yeah, it's very complicated. It's the online thing, like you said, but it's also just the collapse of marriage. The realities of the global dating marketplace is one of their big complaints, where suddenly it's like a Pareto principle where 20% of men can get all the women, and so there's a supply and demand thing where women could, it's more in favour of women. So they can come to some very nihilistic conclusions, which obviously is not the way to go.
No, it's a very sad situation. We have a slightly more old-fashioned sad situation now, the heating crisis, which does feel like something I've experienced of various winters throughout my life, but this one really does seem to be quite stark, Steve.
Yeah, it's the Metro scaring us with their headline, eating or heating. Just for the record, I'll go eating.
Yeah.
Just because I could wear a jumper, and if you don't eat, that jumper won't fit. But the energy bills to rockets, 46% in April is the prediction of some experts. They've been running the numbers. And then 20% in August. And just to terrify us more, you don't add those numbers together, I imagine. It's compound, isn't it? It'd be 20% of the 146%.
Yeah.
75.2% would be a compound increase. It's all going to slap
Are you going to be able to heat your shed? That sounds like that's a very high-risk investment.
It was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Thankfully, it's flammable. But so the actual people part of us will be complaining, going, well, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to get that second holiday, or, oh, my underfloor heating will be a stupid error. The shed might not be that wise. It's more about the 4 million people who are in fuel poverty. This could add another 2 million to it.
Wow.
That's the big issue.
And actually, it's not remotely funny to be without heating during the winter, is it? It's horrible. I mean, that used to be, I know, like during the Gulag era and that sort of thing, that was the thing that people would speak about as the most horrific aspect of it. They would often have to endure Russian winters without fuel. That was enough of a punishment. What do you think?
No, it's worrying for me. I mean, I don't want to fuel the people that claim I'm an unsuccessful comedian on Twitter, but for some of us, the prospect of rising bills is quite worrying. So, yeah, it is worrying. And, what someone suggested here, former Education Minister Robert Halfon, that the environmental tax is at 25% of our energy bills, so we could cut those. That could be a conservative idea, to cut tax. Crazy idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with you. We're sitting on the other side of the fence, because there's a time and place for a green tax. I'm all for finding ways to fund renewable energies, but it might be time to reduce it if we're about to send 2 million people into fuel poverty.
It's extraordinary, actually, how many incidences there are of this, where well-intentioned taxation measures are taken to try and change public behaviour, and all they do is punish the poorest.
Right.
It's like the same thing happened with the sugary drinks, right? Sugary drinks, or just generally sugary foods. You kind of go, right, we're going to try and stop people from drinking 16 teaspoons of sugar, and all you do is like beat up single mums who are trying to raise 3 pestering kids on a meagre salary. Anyway, on that cheerful note, we're going to go for another break. Join us in about 3 or 4 minutes for the final third. And welcome back to part 3 of Headliners. With me are comedians Steve N. Allen and Nick Dixon. Now, the EU have out-EU'd themselves this time, haven't they, Nick? This is a story about green energy.
Yeah, this one's in The Guardian. Fury as EU moves ahead with plans to label gas and nuclear as green. Brussels faces backlash and charges of greenwashing after publishing draft proposals on New Year's Eve.
I mean, they clearly are green. Look at the picture.
Definitely
overwhelmingly green.
Yeah, it's this greenwashing. It's the idea they're basically claiming that nuclear and gas are green, and the more hardcore green people are saying no, they're not. Austria's climate action minister says they're trying to get them in there but claims they're harmful to the climate and environment and destroy the future of our children. I always get a bit suspicious of that kind of hyperbole, but because I'm a bit confused. I'm a layman on this because it's not I'm not that interested in the end of the world and all that through the collapse of the ecosystem, whatever. But I tend to trust Elon Musk. He says we shouldn't be closing nuclear and we should actually they're really safe and we should be sticking with. He says it's all about fission, not fusion. But some disagree and say that.
What do you think, Steve?
I like the idea of nuclear. It's not trendy within the eco-friendly...
Wow. No, I agree with you. It is green by the standards, on the criteria that they're concerned about, which is global warming. It is undeniably green. There's no question about it. The problem is what you do with the refuse. That's another, but that is a slightly separate issue, which is not the one that is COP26 and so on talking about, right?
If you're aiming for low carbon, I think you might need as a bridge energy, nuclear. It doesn't need to be the solution forever, but it doesn't feel that right now the totally renewable low carbon one's the best option. This is more about nomenclature. This is just about calling it green. Yeah. That then gives it some green related.
What they need to do is have shades of green, isn't it? I mean, that wouldn't be unreasonable. Yeah. We already use shades of green to show like how prevalent something is across on a map or something.
Scale.
Yeah.
I see.
So totally green would be solar or wind, I guess, or possibly just
Greta Thunberg.
Jumpers.
It's a picture of Greta Thunberg at one end.
Yeah.
The other end is like Trump or something.
How dare you, as you go from green into red, But I honestly think, gas is not that green, especially if you're getting it from Putin. That's another issue as well. Speaking of the Iron Curtain, Steve, someone crossed into North Korea this week from the south. That is a reversal of the normal pattern. What's going on there?
It's a bit like the film The Rock, isn't it, when they had to break into Alcatraz.
Right.
Somehow we managed to have someone who they think may be a gymnast. Little side note, I never understand why these countries that tend to not want people to escape train people as gymnasts so well.
Train gymnasts, madness.
You're making it hard for yourself. Don't leave trampolines near the border. But a while ago, 2 years ago, escaped to South Korea. Yeah. And now has apparently escaped back. This is a terrible time for the South Korean Tourist Board. Is
it like Miller's Crossing? You remember that old movie where the gangster kind of pretends to go over to the other side, but actually he's just infiltrating them? And I've spoiled it for anyone, but it's 30 years old now. Great movie, though.
Brilliant movie. I'm surprised to hear it in this context. But yeah, man, the fact that he went back into North Korea, he must have had a really good reason. What did he leave behind?
Left the hob on.
Right, you've gone back into North Korea. And the other amusing part to me, mildly, is that it points out that North Korea hasn't confirmed any COVID infection. So hats off to them on that. They've really nailed zero COVID. I totally, for one, believe them.
It's Trump's as much testing theory. It pays off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Zero.
It is conceivable that they have very low COVID. They would be capable of sealing it off to a much... the Chinese numbers are still pretty low, and that's where it started. That's alarming enough in itself. OK, next story. The government has blown £14.7 billion of public money on wasteful projects. Well, frankly, I regard pretty much everything they do as wasteful, but this is to do with crony contracts, duff deals, and other, I think there's some moaning about the Westminster wine cellar. Research based on official figures. Is this something we can trust, Nick? Is it meaningful or is it just whinging? Well,
it is frustrating. I wish Leo was here to rant about Boris's dodgy contracts that he's always shouting about. But it is a case of that. And some examples are great. £73,000 spent stocking the Westminster wine cellar, 30 million COVID test vials to Matt Hancock's mate in the pub landlord, whatever it was.
Yes.
And a £122 million deal for medical gowns that failed safety standards. So just to ratchet up the outrage, the Mirror here compares it to other things the 14.7 million could have bought. Paid the combined salaries of 60,000 nurses, 65,000 teachers, 77,000 police, or 100,000 comedians. Added one of those.
With all those nurses and teachers' salaries, they've sort of depressed the story somehow, haven't they? You just feel whatever. If they said we could have had like a space shark or something.
For some people, that's really wild.
A nuclear powered.
Mirror readers are really riled up by that, Simon. Unless you're not with your cold, right-wing
my disregard for increasing the public sector evermore. Was it 70 grand on the Westminster cellar? That sounds quite modest, to be honest, doesn't it? If you think who's going to visit that. But I do think, was it millions on gowns that don't work? Somebody should have spotted that a bit earlier in the process.
122 million.
Yeah.
Prototype. Yeah. Test that. And the idea that Matt Hancock's local pub landlord, surely he should be the one in charge of sorting out the wine cellar. There's a bit of a sense.
Yes.
But I love the idea that he was brought in to do these COVID test vials. They must have thought, he's got a lot of glassware.
Yeah.
Let's give the huge 30 million quid contract.
That's the kind of lateral thinking that, sadly, we lost Edward de Bono last year. We could have asked him whether it qualified. A nuclear fusion reactor, this was got a mention earlier, doesn't get here thrown together this show. A nuclear fusion reactor in China has set a new record for a sustained high temperature. after running 5 times hotter than the sun for more than 17 minutes. So that feels like the temperature is the achievement there rather than the long lifespan of that, that achievement. 17 minutes, 5 times hotter than the sun. Obviously, there are still a few dials to be tweaked, but according to state media, that has been achieved by China. Yeah. What do we think?
Impressive, yeah. 5 times the temperature of the sun, 3.2 times the temperature of a McDonald's apple pie. Yeah. These are high temperatures that we're dealing with. The time's actually quite...
How about a leather seat left in the sun in a car?
Yeah, even the steering. The time's actually quite impressive as well, because it's relatively easy, put that in quote marks, to get something hot in a flash. Yeah. But to sustain it for that long, it does take us a step towards being able to have fusion. The Experimental Advanced Superconducting Tokamak, which the acronym is EAST. I think they started with the acronym and worked backwards.
Yes, I suspect so, yeah.
But it aims to make a little bit of science. It gives you the opportunity to get a couple of protons, a couple of neutrons, bang them together so hot that they form a plasma. You end up with a little helium nucleus.
This is one of the nice things about it that didn't... I read a report about it that didn't really emphasise this, but we're running out of helium as well. And so we get some more helium out of this as well.
Because helium's really great. It's able to become a really cold temperature because they're just monoatomic. The atoms don't need to do anything. So you can get really cold. It's used to cool quantum computers, and we use it in kids' balloons.
Yes,
we're idiots.
That's fantastic.
And it leaves the planet. That's the problem with it.
Yes, absolutely. We can go and get it on a spaceship once we've got a fusion reactor. We'll go out with a big net. So is this... Because I have seen a video... Sorry, I'll bring in a second, but I have seen a video where they were... I was watching something on YouTube to try and understand it, and it feels like they are building huge, it looks like CERN, you know, the particle accelerator, massive magnet that apparently could lift up an aircraft carrier with this single magnet. And then there's a little tweak in the technology that renders all of that redundant and obsolete, and you have to move on to the next one. You know what I mean? There's this constant... I don't know. What is your...
No, I just realised my contribution is not on that level or on Steve's level. I mean, call me a Luddite. I just feel the sun's hot enough. My concern... And I'm a bit confused as well, because Musk said we don't need fusion, we need fission, and now China's doing fusion. And I'm a little bit worried that China's doing it. I always think, China, do you have to? You know, we've just had this virus they came up with in that lab, and I'm like, it says the ultimate aim of developing the artificial sun device is to deliver near limitless clean energy. Great in theory, but you know it's just actually going to end up blowing up the world, don't you?
Well, the main problem with it at the moment is that it creates, and it actually uses more energy than it creates, and it will do for some time. People who've worked in the nuclear industry say that for the last 50 years, nuclear fusion has always been 50 years away. Always. It's been it's the steadiest horizon that's ever existed. But on the other hand, you know, that's what you have to do. And even in the early days of steam, it was actually mainly the problem was containing the high temperatures necessary. It's always those kind of territories that are...
I love the idea it's always 50 years away. It's like the increasingly mad Corbyn brother that we never meet.
The Times has the revelation that during the Second World War, British teenagers were being trained to kill in case of invasion. Funnily enough, my father, who was born in 1930, he was recruited as a sort of courier during the Second World War, and he didn't know he was allowed to talk about it until he saw a documentary about this in the 2010s, and he decided he would share that with me. They used teenagers and kids quite liberally, I believe, on the home front. I can't imagine that kind of thing working today. But, Nick, what have you got on this?
Yeah, this is in the Times. Details of a secret civilian army of British teenagers who were trained to kill during the Second World War have emerged in research. So, like you say, they were sort of sworn to secrecy, but then later people did come out with it. Among them was Irene Lockley from South Milford, North Yorkshire. Before her death, she revealed to her daughter, Jenny, how she'd been trained to kill and maim and cause as much damage to the enemy as possible.
Wow.
Imagine your mum coming out with that. Yeah. I mean, that is... I mean, my mum's president of the WI, she probably could do some damage, but...
Hitting needles.
But yeah, so it's pretty... And then, it's fascinating stuff. It says she disclosed how she and other family members were taught how to derail trains, make Molotov cocktails and garrote and many other skills. Sounds quite cool, but the sinister part to me is when this guy, Andrew Chatterton's written a book about it, and he said that teenagers tended to make good recruits as they were naive enough to carry out actions without thinking too much about the consequences, as well as being fit and active. So it's a bit of a Jason Bourne thing. They got the cool skills, but were they being used?
Well, this has long been understood by various African warlords, isn't it, who recruit kids terrifyingly young, and actually, you know, it's quite quick. It's quite easy to get them to administer justice at the end of an AK-47 at a certain age.
It must make it harder to make them eat their greens. I can't help but think making your kids, you know, be able to kill with one hand, harder to discipline.
That photograph, though, is impressive. I mean, they look lean, they look healthy, they look like they can handle themselves with those farm implements. I mean, I would like to see a bit more of that in our modern-day kids. I don't know whether we can create... I know all the menaces that kids currently confront, things like climate change, obviously the pandemic, they're all very large-scale, conceptual and hazy, aren't they? I think they need the threat of an actual physical invasion in order to get back up on the balls of their feet a little bit more. Anyway, very interesting story in tomorrow's Express. A 2,000-year-old model of the solar system has been described as the oldest example of an analogue computer. Is it a new discovery, Steve?
No, they found this years ago. And it says archaeologists have been stunned for years by what's been described as the world's oldest analogue computer. So why are we hearing about it now? Well, when you think about archaeologists, the timescales they work on, this is actually pretty darn snappy.
When was it dug up?
Well, they found it, a couple of years ago. They've been working on this. It's known as the, I'm going to say it wrong, I'm sure, Antikythera mechanism. It's a 2,000-year-old ancient Greek hand-powered orrery, which is, if you've seen the film Pitch Black, a little model that models the way the solar system works.
But did they know that the solar system had the sun at its heart in those days, or were they trying to make a model that worked?
I think you'd have to, because the only way you could have a physical mechanism...
Well, no, they did have models of how the solar system was supposed to work pre-Copernican, but they were absurdly complex. That was the thing about it.
I think mathematically you can describe it, but to actually make a thing that moves like that. But these days we just hang it over a kid's bed and call it a mobile. But what I like about it is ancient Greeks managed to do this. Meanwhile, 2020...
Pre-Christian, even.
Go and have a look on YouTube. Some idiot will be all angry about the flat Earth. How have we gone backwards?
Well, that's the question. I mean, that's like the Graham Hancock Atlantis theory. You know, the idea that we had these sophisticated civilizations, but because they relied on technology and everything, they all collapsed, whereas nomadic tribes survived, and that's us now. I don't think you've ever heard that.
We don't. But the angry people are using a phone that's got GPS on it whilst ranting about the fact we're not a sphere. That bothers me.
It is a shame. If you watch Carl Sagan's Cosmos, he deals with it very adequately. That's all we have time for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. My guests have been Steve N. Allen and Nick Dixon. I've been Simon Evans. I hope I'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you very much. Good night.